So I hope you all are ready to talk about beans and grains. I know that that may be a little intimidating for some of you because we've spent a lot of time in our large culture being warned away from grains, but we're going to talk about how to make them not hurt you today. I want to introduce to you Jill Nussinow. She is a friend of mine that I met running around the country speaking at Mother Earth News Fairs, and she is known as the Veggie Queen. She's got some really great books, and I love what she does. So, Jill, you want to talk to us a little bit about who you are and what your projects are?
Sure. I'm a longtime nutritionist, a formerly registered dietitian, having a little administrative issue at the moment, but I'm still good. I do the same thing. I've been teaching people how to cook a multitude of things for more than 30 years, and I've written 4 cookbooks. And I started writing before the world was ready for this book, which is The Veggie Queen, Vegetables Get the Royal Treatment. It's all about vegetables throughout the year. Then I was so bold and wrote this book, which is called The New Fast Food. This is about pressure cooking before people were ready to pressure cook. And this book actually came out prior to the Instant Pot. So I've been teaching people how to pressure cook for about 25 years, which is a little crazy. People are like, really? I'm like, yes. And my grandmother did not have a pressure cooker, but my mother did.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, yeah, my mother had a pressure cooker and I was terrified of the thing. And I write about that in my book because it was real and I was never going to use a pressure cooker. But the thing that propelled me into using a pressure cooker was beans, because I love beans and I was working, 40 plus hours a week and I did not have time to cook beans and I wanted to cook my own beans. And so I eventually learned how to use the pressure cooker. And it wasn't the kind with the thing on top that goes ch-ch-ch-ch-ch. I was terrified of that thing. It just has a little pressure valve and it pops up and it's quiet. And so I kind of fell in love with pressure cooking and taught many, many, many pressure cooking classes before the Instant Pot. And then when the Instant Pot came along, people were just so enamored with the Instant Pot. This book, it's so interesting because I had no idea, but all of a sudden I started getting like order after order after order. And it was because the Instant Pot came along and people needed to know how to use the pressure cooker. And it turned out that the recipes in this book were designed for the stovetop pressure cooker, but work in the Instant Pot. So it's kind of a magical thing. And I couldn't for a long time, more than a year, figure out why that was. But what it is the Instant Pot has a lot of insulation on the outside and it cooks at a lower pound per square inch. And because of that insulation and the lower temperature, it seems to just translate to using the same timing as you would if you used a stovetop cooker. Fascinating point in this is that if you use a stovetop cooker, it takes probably 30 to 50% less time because it's faster. But
even than the Instant Pot.
Oh yeah, because you can regulate the heat. So here's the interesting thing. If you use an Instant Pot, like I could be making stock in my Instant Pot right this minute. I could be cooking quinoa. I could be making a pot of beans. I don't have to be there. But once you put your pressure cooker on the stove, don't leave the house. Okay. So unless I'm standing right in front of it, or somewhere in the near vicinity, you don't want to leave your stovetop pressure cooker. And that's why the Instant Pot is such a magical thing, because you can just set it and walk away, which you can't do with your stovetop cooker. But the recipes that are in this book, The New Fast Food, these are my more basic recipes, because after that book came out, I didn't do anything with pressure cooking for a while. I came out with this book, which is called Nutrition Champs. And Nutrition Champs is all about like my most nutrition oriented book. and I got 44 other people to contribute recipes. And it's a huge variety of recipes, and each letter stands for a class of ingredients. So it's cruciferous vegetables, herbs and spices, alliums, mushrooms, peas, beans, and lentils, and seeds and nuts. Kind of like the really like top foods that you can eat if you tolerate them well. But most people don't eat enough vegetables, and almost everyone could
Yeah.
use mushrooms. So I wrote
Yeah.
that book and thought, oh yeah, that's great. And then I had an idea. I was going to take the new fast food and I was going to upgrade it and bring it to a publisher, and they would be like, great, we want to take that book and we want to do all kinds of great things with it. But it didn't work out that way exactly. And so I did get a publisher, and I have this book, Vegan Under Pressure. But this I call like Pressure Cooking 2.0. A lot of people are novices and they buy this book and they love this book, but it's really not necessarily for beginning pressure cooker users, only because some of the recipes are more complicated. But in each book, I have like something that I call Quick Quinoa Perfection. And it's like how to cook your quinoa in 5 minutes under pressure and make it turn out right. And so there's some very simple things in each book that people can learn how to cook beans and grains. One of the things that I teach is sprouting, which is really interesting because it's a great way to get your beans and grains going before you actually are cooking them. And so it's so simple. And I do teach a class in this. And my sister said, you teach people how to put water on seeds? I'm like, yes, I do. And they learn and they do it and they repeat it and they love it. But it's just kind of funny. But sprouting is really the first step. But you don't have to do it. And, it helps and it's good, but you don't have to sprout if you don't want to. But even, there's this debate about soaking beans and not soaking beans. I am a soaker. Almost always soak my beans. I think it gives them a really good head start. I do have a special thing that I did not put in my cookbook because, it's a long story. But anyway, the manuscript went to the publisher and then sat there for a long time. And I didn't have time to add this special thing, which is called a quicker soak. And that is in your Instant Pot. You put 3 inches of water above your beans. You set your Instant Pot on 0, and a lot of them do go to 0 and low. And when you do that, what happens is at the end of the time, when your timer beeps, you just leave it and then the pressure drops. And that's usually about 25 minutes from start to finish. And 2 important things. One, you don't have to do that. You can do a quick soak, which is taking your beans and bring them to a boil for 1 minute, turning it off and letting them sit an hour. And then you go on to cook them. And I like to discard the cooking water. Some people are like, don't do that. I almost always do that. And yeah. And so you can do quick soak, you can do quicker soak. And this other thing you can do, which is really smart and which I really encourage people to do who don't remember to soak, is soak when you can, drain your beans, label them, and put them in your freezer. And then when you're like, I want beans, you have pre-soaked beans ready to go. And I have to tell you, I recently did entered a recipe contest that was for canned beans. And it was such a strange thing for me because I always say, yeah, buy canned beans for emergencies. And this was not an emergency, but I had to learn how to use them. And it was so strange for me to like open a can of beans. And then I was like, oh, I'm like, now I know why I cook them myself, because they come out exactly as I want. But there's nothing wrong with canned beans. Although I think that fresh cooked beans, from dry are much better. They're much less expensive and they're easy to do. But it was for canned bean company and I needed to use their canned beans. So I did. But anyway, so it's like a really simple process. I tell people if you can boil water, there's a lot you can do. You can cook grains, you can cook beans. You don't have to do a whole lot of things. But if you have an Instant Pot, you can cook beans fairly quickly in like half the time of stovetop cooking, at least half the time. And if you soak them, so let's just take black beans or pinto beans. If you soak them beforehand, they are going to be at pressure for 4 to 6 minutes. And that's not the only time, because it takes time for the pressure to come up and time for the pressure to go down. But that is still going to be maybe 20 minutes from start to finish. And usually if you do them on the stovetop, it's going to be an hour or more. Now, if you pre-soak them, it's 4 to 6 minutes at pressure. If you don't soak them, it's about 20 to 25 minutes at pressure. So you can see it takes about 4 times as long if you don't soak them. And soaking is a simple process. And one of the things I almost always add to my beans is a strip of kombu seaweed. I happen to live on the Northern California coast, so
Lucky.
I harvest my own seaweed, which is really lovely. But if you don't, you can buy it and just put a little piece in, and it adds a lot of minerals to your beans, helps them cook better. And then you get those minerals that you need. And it also contains iodine, which a lot of people need, especially if you don't use iodized salt, which I don't always recommend. So I highly recommend that you take a look at about cooking your own beans. And, it's if you sprout them beforehand, which basically is putting water in them, draining them. And I use like a little bowl, and I take my jar and put it at an angle and let it drain, and put a sprout lid on or some cheesecloth, and just let it drain, and rinse them twice a day. After a couple days, they grow little tails. And then you only need to cook them for this maybe about the same time as if they were soaked, and sometimes even a little less. And it is magic for people who have trouble digesting beans. Many people find they can. Now, what I do want to say is you cannot sprout beans that do not have a hull. So you cannot do split peas or red lentils, but anything with a hull like mung beans or any other kind of bean you can do. But anything split, you cannot sprout. Although I do have some red lentils from Washington State that do sprout, and they don't have a shell, but that's really unusual. But even just soaking them helps.
So let's talk a little bit about the nutritional reason, because I think there are a lot of people who don't know this whole world of soaking your grains or sprouting your grains or soaking your beans. And obviously it makes it easier to cook, but there's nutritional changes, right?
Right. Well, basically you're helping decrease the phytic acid that's in the beans and grains, which really helps a lot for a lot of people for digestion. And it's interesting because I pretty much eat gluten-free, so I don't eat, so my grains generally are not true grains. They are more grass grains like quinoa and millet and amaranth and teff and wild rice. So they're not going to be the wheat, rye, barley, but all of them benefit from that. And here's a great thing to do. If you're going to eat wheat, get really good wheat berries, take them and sprout them and then taste them. Because what happens is the sugars in the wheat berries start to come out. And when you chew on them, they're sweet. So there is not only getting rid of the phytates in there, but it also stimulates the grain to express itself in the way that it needs to.
Becomes a vegetable.
Right.
It grows. It becomes a vegetable, and it's expressing its potential instead of just being a seed.
Exactly.
When I first started all of this, trying to rebalance my body, the awareness kind of hit me like a ton of bricks that I was eating beans and grains and seeds and nuts and all of these things that were in their potential state. And those plants are designed to protect themselves in that potential state. And so I was eating all of that and causing all this inflammation. And it was a revelation to realize that just very simply, I could soak or sprout something and change my health profile immensely.
Right. And it's really easy. And I do want to, I mean, the whole thing with sprouting beans is most of them, the one that I don't recommend people sprout and eat is kidney beans because they can be toxic.
Mm,
But yeah, in their raw state. So even if undercooked kidney beans, for some people, it's a small percentage of people, but you don't want to do that. You don't want to take any chances. But almost all other ones can be soaked and sprouted, and they can be eaten raw. And one of the ones that people don't usually think that much about, but they've eaten them if they've gone to a Chinese restaurant, is mung bean sprouts, because those are those white sprouts that are in Chinese
yeah.
food. And they're super easy to grow and they're delicious. And I think it's a great way to introduce like kids to eating beans is to eat
Hmm.
them in that way because they're crunchy and they're tasty and they're easy to digest. So I do cook beans, but I also eat sprouted beans. Like one of them that I really like is speckled peas are delicious, sprouted. And it's a
Is that
certain
an heirloom variety?
well, no, it's a certain type of. Here's the funny thing. This past year, I taught how to grow microgreens, and I had a whole bunch. You know, when you sprout them and they're in close proximity, not all of them sprout. So there was some left over. So I put them in a pot outside, and I had peas, and they grow. They're like sugar snap peas. It's just a type of pea that's generally used for sprouting and microgreens. And I thought,
Oh,
well, I
very
have nothing
cool.
to lose. I'm going to throw this away or it's going to go in the soil. And I had them for months. So it was so interesting to see what happened. But they're so light and digestible when you sprout your beans. But sprouted beans on a taco for me are not going to make it. So I really do need to cook my beans in order to use them in the ways that I want. Like you can make sprouted hummus, you can make probably a sprouted raw sprouted stew, but when it gets cooler out, I really like to eat more cooked food rather than in the
Yeah.
summer. In the summer, I might eat way more sprouts than I do now. But it's a trade-off between the garden and what you can grow indoors. And sprouting grains and beans. I sprout more beans than grains. I do one of the easiest to sprout grains is quinoa. Quinoa will sprout in like a day. In one
I've never
day,
tried quinoa.
okay, if you look at it, it has those little tails that you see when it's
Hmm.
cooked. It happens when you just sprout it for one day. So
Oh,
it's
wow.
really amazing. Some of them don't do that well. Like amaranth is sticky, teff is sticky. I'm doing millet right now. It takes a couple of days, and they need to really be drained well. I'm currently making something that I'm just starting on this journey, but I have done it called Rejuvelac, which you generally make,
Yes.
yeah, with grains. And I started with quinoa Rejuvelac, and I have to say, I had a friend whose husband had a tummy ache, and I said, "Well, try some of this. Drink a quarter cup a day." And he said that he had remarkable results, and that it really helped him.
It's
So.
traditionally done with barley. Is that correct? Rejuvelac?
Usually wheat. Wheat is the number
Oh, wheat.
one. It can
Okay.
be done with wheat, rye, barley. It can be done with any grain, from what I understand.
I'll have to play
So
with that.
yeah, it's really interesting. And then I had a revelation, not related to beans or grains. You can use the Rejuvelac to culture yogurt. And I was like, what?
Wow.
But it
Wow.
doesn't stay good that long. That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
If
I mean,
it's
all of this stuff, it was all, this is a cultural piece that we've lost. We are the
absolutely
only culture that just picks up a seed and goes, "Oh, I'll eat that."
right.
All the other cultures, they were doing some sort of byproduct of some ferment fed into their grain and bean and nut eating, or that byproduct fed into something else that they were doing, because their kitchens were so much more intertwined, or are so
Right,
intertwined.
because it's life, right? Like it's not like I'll go to the 7-Eleven or let me run down to the grocery store. It's like, how can I make this happen in my house? Um,
Yeah,
and I did, not unlike a lot of other people, did get into sourdough during the pandemic.
I
I
do a
did
lot of that.
gluten-free sourdough, which I loved.
Nice.
It was so good. And then at some point, I mean, only recently did I let it go. And I'm sorry I did, because then I was like, oh, I got to start again, another 7 days. But it's really not that big a deal. But I think what happened was I don't eat a lot of flour products, and it became more challenging for me to figure out what to do with my sourdough to kind of,
Yeah.
enjoy it and stay away from the flour products. But like I did a buckwheat bread with it, which was delicious, a bit of work. So I did, buckwheat blackberry pancakes. I did
Mhm.
scones and things, but those are not things that I eat a lot of. I do eat a lot of whole grains. Like and like steel cut oats. I currently have one that I'm making, which is steel cut oats, buckwheat, and millet, that I really like a lot. I find it much more satisfying than just the steel cut oats alone. And then what you can do is, like, you can, at the end, after I cooked it, I'll stir in some yogurt that I made, or some of the Rejuvelac, or something fermented. I try to eat fermented food every single day,
Yeah.
which I do manage to do, but a lot of people do not, and it's so good for you. And so that's why the Rejuvelac's kind of like a little, oh, look what I can do.
That's very cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm definitely going to look into that.
yeah.
The this journey for me of getting into all of this entailed a lot of beans sitting out for 24 hours with a heating pad around it, and people think that I mean, what you're talking about is such a revelation for me, coming from my path. I had to do it all the long way. And I want people to change this because they're having grain problems and bean problems, and we need to eat more of those things and vegetables. And everybody's got such digestive issues that it's difficult to use those. But to ask somebody to make a pot of beans, wrap a heating pad around it, leave it in your living room for 24 hours, like, it starts to be a big ask in the way of
Right,
changing lifestyle.
right. Well, it's somebody just, I'm teaching a sprouting class, and someone said, well, how much countertop space do I need to devote to this? And it's like, hardly any, like a jar and a bowl. That's all you
Yeah.
need. And that's like so easy to get that done. And then your pressure cooker, if you have one, and I highly recommend them, you can get it done really quickly. And then the joy is, when I don't feel like cooking, I just pull something out of the freezer that I've already made. And so, like I said, you can take the beans, you can sprout them, soak them, have them ready to go, and you don't have to think so much. And for me, that's always the joyous part. Like, oh, somebody cared about me so much that they put food in my freezer. I'm like, hooray.
And it was
Um,
me.
it was me, and then I get
Yeah.
to go, oh yeah, you're so good to yourself, or,
Yeah.
because it's not always like, oh yeah, I feel like it tonight. But I mean, my husband says, well, you just eat better than most people. I'm like, well, I do, um, because I think it really matters. And I
It
see a lot
does.
of people, who don't. And I'm like, yeah, it's so scary. My late father had a saying. It was, you can be an example or you can be a warning. And
Yeah.
I look at that and I'm like, yes, you are correct. And I want to be
Yeah.
the example. And I don't know what people think about what I eat, but I eat rather simply, but really deliciously. So, I mean, I eat a lot of tacos. I love tacos. And, I will take my cooked beans and put them on a tortilla, add some fermented, I make this seed and nut cheese, put some of that on, put a little fermented salsa or some kimchi or some sauerkraut, some cilantro because I'm kind of an addict about that, and maybe
Me too.
yeah, and that could be it. That could be all that's in there, and or some avocado. It's so tasty. And all I've done is take things out of my refrigerator that I put into my refrigerator. I didn't
Hmm.
like spend 3 hours at the stove, which I'm never going to do. Um, I just make it easy, or, pull out a jar of sprouts and put those on a sandwich with some avocado, or, just easy things. But I do believe one of the things that gets to be hard, and I completely understand it, is the rhythm of a couple of things. The rhythm of the kitchen. Like, as soon as I'm done or getting halfway done with my pot of beans that I make them every week, lentils, beans, peas. As soon as I'm like halfway done, I think about another one. Same with sprouts. When I get halfway through the sprouts I've grown, I start another one. So there's this like little rhythm about what happens, like, oh, did I get my sweet potatoes cooked for the week? Do I have my grain cooked? Do I have enough grain in the freezer? My quinoa, my whatever I have, you know. And so there's the rhythm in the kitchen, and then there's the rhythm of the seasonal products. That's so interesting, that I think we really need to keep in our mind. Which I have a story in this first book, in the Veggie Queen book, which is this very moment is out of print. But I have a story in here about eggplant, and a friend who said, I just went, and she told me where she went. It's a all organic store. And she said, but I just bought an eggplant and it was terrible. And I said, Lori, that's because it's January. She said, what do you mean? And she's from Wisconsin. So she was like, what do you mean? I'm like, I mean that January eggplant is not the eggplant you want to eat. And I think that's part of what we miss because people are like, I went to the store, they had melon. It's like, but is melon in season? I got a watermelon. It wasn't very good. I'm like, this is October or November or whenever it
Yeah.
is, and we have a hard time with that in general, which is honestly why I wrote this first book. I have 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, winter, anytime. And that's the fifth one. That's anytime. And the last one, I had a short pressure cooking chapter in here. And I am positive when this book came out, which is a while ago now, people were like, that woman is crazy. Pressure cooker? Why would I
You
use
were
a
ahead
pressure
of your
cooker?
time.
I was, and it's okay, because now there's a lot of books on seasonal vegetables. There's books
Hmm.
on foraging. There's books on, we're so lucky to have such abundance of information, but it's also hard to find the path to where you want to go with all that information. And so this is beautiful that you're doing this, because I think you're helping people walk down that path, get the info that they need, and be able to do it. It has to happen. If you really want to make change, people really need to see why it's important to adapt and adopt this kind of eating.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. The rhythms, it you have to commit to why you're doing it to decide to create your rhythms. If you aren't committed to your why, then you're not going to take the time to say, okay, every fourth day I need to make more of this, or I need to feed this, or keep going, because then it'll just feel like disconnected work and it's chaos. And it doesn't need to be chaos. What I love about your books are that for somebody who came into this with all of this new information that I needed to soak and sprout and sour, I started with simply soaking. And I think it's a great place for people to start, because it's the most like the way that they've always been. But it was still really labor intensive. We still have to sort of live in this fast food world because our lives are like that. And so by looking at your books, I could see where, oh my gosh, I could do all of this slow food eating and slow food life. I could find a way to put it into the life that I'm living, with kids going every different
Right.
direction, because there are shortcuts where I still get quality at the end. So using the Instant Pot and the pressure cooker like you do, is a gift to be able to do the old traditional ways, but in a new way that allows me to keep up with my life.
Yeah. Well, I think the Instant
It's
Pot
less
for
overwhelming.
so many people is just a game changer. And you know, I run
Hmm.
into people, they're like, "Well, I don't have an Instant Pot." I'm like, "Okay, you're still alive. Things are going well. It's
You'll be
okay."
all right.
And they're like, "Well, why do I need one?" I'm like, "Maybe you don't, but you know, if you're busy and you are going here and there and everywhere, and you want to eat more whole foods, it is the thing that's going to help you so much because you don't need to babysit it. You can be at a soccer game and you can make
Yeah.
split pea soup. You know, you can make bean stew. You can make chili. You can't make your vegetables unless it's potatoes or sweet potatoes or winter squash. You can't make your vegetables and go to the soccer game because you'll come back to mush. But you can do anything that takes a little bit longer cooking and it'll be fine. And
You might as well use that time. You're away. Use
yeah,
it for the cooking.
yeah, it's like doing laundry. I love doing laundry. People are like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, you don't have to do anything. You put it in and you walk away and you come back, you put it in the dryer, you hang it out, you walk away, you come back. You know, you can do something else at the same time.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that.
For somebody who was just getting their toes in this world of, if they're watching this and they're thinking, what? I should have been soaking my beans and grains. What would be the first thing that you would say is super easy to try and learn to get into a routine?
I think I would say soaking beans is the easiest thing. And well, first of all, anybody who's cooked their own beans knows they taste so much better than in a can. And the canned really are for emergencies. And so I'd say soak your beans. You can sprout them. And I think that's, if you have kids, sprouting is joyous because they get to see something that was hard as a rock turn into something you can put in your mouth and eat. So I
Yeah.
mean, it all it takes is a mason jar and a sprouting lid, some clean water, and just do it and see what happens. And then if you like eating, you know, your chickpeas sprouted better than you like them cooked, just do them that way. Um, you know, maybe your kids love them. Maybe you love your mung beans just like that, and you don't really like cooked mung beans. So I'd say get yourself a jar, a sprouting lid, and just soak those seeds and then drain them. You have to drain them really well. And then just remember to water them twice a day. And I teach this with a woman who has a company called the Sprout House. And Rita doesn't like extra steps. And I don't like that many extra steps, but I often like to sprout my seeds in, or grains or whatever, in a cabinet because I like them out of the light, and I cover what I'm doing. And she says, "Well, I keep them right next to the sink so that I remember to rinse them twice a day." And I'm like, "You
It's
know
right
what?
there.
Whatever works." You know, that's what I'm
Yeah.
really into. Whatever works, because I will usually remember. She won't remember. She's got to have them right in front of her. And so I think you need to find the path that makes it easiest for you to do the thing you really want to do. And as you said, the why really matters. Am I doing this because I want to feel better? Am I doing this because I want my kids to eat healthier? And remember, if your kids are going to eat healthier, you're going to eat healthier too, because you're going to eat that food. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I think it's,
That, yeah,
yeah, it's just, if you've never cooked a pot of beans, people are amazed the first time they cook a pot of beans, I think. They're like, wow, I took that thing that was like a rock and now I made it edible. And it's remarkable
and
because
it doesn't taste like the can of mush that I normally use for this recipe.
there you go. I didn't say that, you
Yeah.
did. So yeah, I
Yep.
mean, as I opened those beans, I was like, oh, no wonder I cook my own. I still want
Yeah.
to win the recipe contest, but but
You'll
I
have
was
to
like,
let me know.
I was just like, oh, okay, that's why. But if I had an emergency, I'd be happy to have canned beans.
It's important to always backfill if you're learning a new skill, to backfill with the thing that you used to depend on, because the worst thing is it's 8 o'clock at night and you still don't have dinner on the table and you have nothing that's fast that you can put it together, and you've committed to sprouting everything. Like,
Right.
you can't back yourself into a corner like that and expect it to be an enjoyable process of getting
Right.
healthier.
It's called life, and you have to go with
Hmm.
what works, and what works for you
Absolutely.
may be different than what works for me. And I like to cook a lot at one time and then have it and freeze it and have it ready. And and some people just people tell me this, and I kind of don't understand it. They're like, my husband won't eat leftovers. I'm like, well, he wouldn't be my husband.
I know they wouldn't survive in my house. No. Mm-mm.
I'm like, what do you mean? They're not leftovers. I call them planned overs. I made that so we'd have some, maybe not the next day, but the day after. We're going to have it maybe in a
Just
different
the
form.
ingredients for the
Yeah,
next thing. Yeah.
right. It makes it so much easier. And yes,
Yeah.
use your Instant Pot if you have one. If you don't have one, think about getting one. Coming up is what do they call that? Black Friday. And they usually have great deals then. If you don't have one, I think the last time they had them for like $49 or $59. I highly recommend it. The size of your pot really matters. So if you have a family of 4, you probably want to get a 6-quart. If you have a family of 5 or more, you probably want to get an 8-quart. The 8-quart, though, I just got one for someone who said they wanted one, is quite a bit larger. It's just bigger around and it's heavier. So
Mm.
you only want to get that. And here's a key to pressure cooking. You can only fill your pot half full with food that expands. So in an 8-quart cooker, you can pretty much only, put in about 4 quarts, because it's going to expand. You're going to end up with like 6 quarts, but you need room for the pressure to come up and down. So it's kind of an
Yeah,
interesting
I
thing.
always need the biggest that there is because I'm the person that wants to stuff a whole chicken in. So,
Yeah, you can do that. Yeah, a
yep,
whole
yep.
chicken, well, a little chicken fits in the 6-quart, but you probably want a
I love
bigger
that you
chicken.
can. I love that I can stuff a frozen chicken in there when I forgot. So,
Well, yeah,
um,
I think that's important.
yeah,
Does it meet your needs? That's like number
yeah,
one.
for
So,
sure.
and I have a
Well,
group I have a group on Facebook for Instant Pot beginners, and it's interesting.
oh,
People will come and
perfect.
say, "I've had my Instant Pot in the box for the last year." I'm like, "It's not doing you any good. Take it out of the
It
box."
didn't cook anything.
Right, you haven't cooked anything. And so it's we only talk about non-meat products there, but it's called Instant Pot Beginners Veg Support. We're very supportive. If you come there, you can read through all kinds of things, you can ask questions. There are no stupid questions. I have 3 people who help me, and we love answering questions. And if it's something that's been asked 25 times, we might say, well, take a look around and see, or just give you the short answer.
For
But
that. I
it's
love that.
everybody needs to start somewhere. And so
Yeah.
start where you feel comfortable, and then you might not ever progress to the next thing. Maybe what you start with is what works for you. So one of
Yeah.
those things.
Well,
So,
Jill, thank you so much for coming on and giving us some of your really good tips here. I love that your books are available and that you're out there teaching people and making this accessible because more people, you're right, we do need to eat more vegetables. I think people just don't know how to make vegetables fun, so we need more and more options. And the beans and grains are universally important for all of us. So thanks for making
absolutely.
that easier.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you for having me. And I hope everybody, feels comfortable enough to step in and cook.